Hi there, my name's Brad Scott. I'm a portrait photographer out of Sydney, Australia, and I run the portrait studio called Images by Brad. And today, all I'm doing on this video is walking you through my workflow for cosmetic retouching. So you can see here I've got in Lightroom, I've got my catalogue of selected images from one of my shoots. This is the lovely bee. She, sat for me for one of my shoots, and I've got one of her images here. All the images here are, color corrected and have the right sharpening, exposure levels, adjustments, and all those sorts of things ready to go into Photoshop to be retouched. So that's the first thing we do is just right click on this image and bring it into Photoshop to be retouched. So as my sessions are all, about contemporary glamour and beauty, the cosmetic retouching it's an important part of my workflow, and I always have my images retouched before I show them to the client. So what I do is I have a bunch of actions you can see over here on the right hand side of the screen, and they just help me with the various steps in my process from going start to finish. So the initial thing that I do is clean up any skin blemishes using the healing tool. So I can use the shortcut J to bring that up. I usually go into 100%, or in this case that's probably appropriate, but I can back it out a little bit because I think probably about there is right. I don't spend too much time here. In this particular image, there's not a lot to do because the lighting's quite soft, and even there's a lot of fill coming back in, so there's not a lot of work to do. But in any case, I use this to, I'm working from my tablet, of course, because I can't do this sort of thing with a mouse. So I'm just using my healing brush spot healing brush to take some selections from areas of the skin where I like the texture, just to do some healing of some of the, just some of the normal skin blemishes that you get on everyone's skin. Take away some of those. But as I say, on this image, I could almost do nothing. Something happened weird there. And it'd be okay because there's not a lot of work to do. Also, it's probably important to note, because I don't do skin smoothing here. So this part of the process is all about just finding a few of those little blemishes, taking them away. The skin smoothing will happen a bit later on when I use Portraiture by Imagenomic, just to automate some of that process of smoothing out the skin and combine it with some of these manual steps. So that's enough for me. I've pretty much done enough of taking away any of the blemishes on the skin, and I'm happy with that. One more up here, and from there I'll hit the action skin smoothing, which is running my plugin for portraiture, and you'll see the difference. Back that out a little bit. So there you can probably see, if I turn that on and off, you can see that there's just an evenness in the skin in terms of colour, and takes any of those remaining blotches away. What I find with portraiture when I run it the way I do, it's pretty much a standard sort of settings. I find that it's a little bit too much in terms of some of the skin smoothing, and takes some of that real texture away. So what I'm doing is I'm working on a separate layer here. That's part of my action. I take that back a bit until I feel like I've got something that looks fairly natural. So about 70% there. I'll flatten that out. In the workflow, the way I have it set up, and I'm not doing a lot of levels adjustments, and I'm working with a 16-bit TIFF, I don't mind working destructively. So every adjustment that I do, I'm pretty much flattening it down to make things simple for me as I work through this as I go. So I don't have a problem working in a destructive manner at this stage in the process. So the next step is to do something called frequency separation. So I've hit a little action on there to create me this folder. And frequency separation is all about separating out adjustments to the color and tone of the image from the texture. So at this stage, generally what I want to do is adjust color and tone, and 90% of the time I'm just using it to get sort of hit some bags under the eyes and even out color and tone there, and ensuring that I'm leaving the texture alone so that the integrity of the skin texture is kept intact. So I'm going to hit S to get the clone stamp. I'm going to ensure that my opacity is about 30 and my flow is about 20. Or I should say exactly. So then I'm just going to sample under from the highlights and move on up a little bit and just tapping through light touches, and that makes quite a significant difference. As you can see, the texture of the skin there, if I go right in, is still completely intact. I haven't blurred anything here, and that's the benefit of using the frequency separation. So just hitting under the eyes there, I still want to make it look natural. I don't want to take away everything altogether. I just want to even it up so it looks a lot brighter under the eyes there. Also, with most of my adjustments, what you'll see as I go through is a lot of the time I feel like I make those adjustments a little bit further than I'd like, and then I just sort of dial them back. So let's just have a look at this one. If I turn that off and on, you can see a fairly significant difference. So what I will usually do here is also take that back just a bit until I'm happy with it. So I'm taking it to around about 75%, and I'm happy with that. So I'll flatten that down again. The next step is to desaturate, or I say desaturate the skin. It's desaturating the image, but I'm taking the master opacity down a little bit, and also taking away a bit more of the reds. So I find that particularly Canon files, even if the white balance is correct, some of the reds in the skin tone can be a little bit too oversaturated for my liking. So I usually take those down, and again, it's quite a subtle difference, but I think in the finished image it looks quite good, and that's just my style. So again, I can adjust the opacity up and down depending on my preference, but I'm happy with that one, so I'll leave it as it is. So I'll flatten that down. The next step in my process is to do the eyes. Okay, I've got actions for blue eyes and then other coloured eyes. So the reason for that is that she's got blue eyes, so I'm going to hit that now and just let that build. The reason for that is when you see what's happening over in the layers palette is that I create in the managing the tone, I've got a curves layer here that lifts up the tone and brightens the eyes. I do that in such a way that it brightens the colour of the eyes, so in this case it's blue. So the layer mask in there is based on the blue channel. That's all that is. So, alright, so I'm going quite close here. I'll switch to my brush, so I'll hit B on my keyboard, the shortcut for the brush. I'll make this nice and small so I can just lighten in around the iris. I'm going to go ahead and start with, well, it's at 60 opacity at the moment and 20 flow, so that's fine for just in around the iris, and I'll just go in. And I kind of want to do the bottom of the iris more than anything else. I find that looks really cool. So just going over the layers palette here, I've got a little bit of saturation added, but not too much. I've got the brightening of the eyes. The one important thing here, which it's not labeled correctly, but basically I've got a layer in there to really do edge enhancement and get me some sort of, it's basically clarity. get me some definition in the iris there, and I think that makes the eyes really pop, so that's quite important. I'm going to dial my opacity back now to about 30% and just do the whites of the eyes. I want to do those really subtly. I also want to make sure I don't do those evenly from sort of edge to edge. I want to do more brightening in towards the iris and less towards the edges, because I find that if you do that evenly across the whole eye, then it tends to flatten the image a little bit and it doesn't look natural. So just brightening in around the edges there and not as much towards the edges of the eye. Brightening in the centre around the iris. So if I find also when I do this is that it's best to go back out to look at the difference in terms of what we've done with the eyes. So turn it off there, turn it back on, you can see that looks really good. Again, I'll probably just bring it back just a touch to about there. I might also just give I don't always do this, but sometimes I'll want to just brighten the teeth if I think the eyes are a little bit too bright. It will look a bit odd if I don't lift up the teeth. I'll use the same adjustment because basically you're not doing anything we're just using it to lift up the amount of lightness. So I think that's about right. So she looks really good now, the eyes pop. So I'll flatten that back down. So at this stage, I'm pretty much done. You'll see that I didn't really look at the rest of the skin, but the Image Nomic portraiture plugin does a pretty solid job of any of the skin smoothing and retouching on other parts of the body. So I pretty much focus everything on the face. Obviously we've got a nice flattering pose here, so obviously got to get that right first. So the last step in my process is to add a little bit of contrast. I light my images in such a way that it's a very soft beauty light, so and I don't add contrast in Lightroom. I just keep it at a normal setting. So in this case, I'll punch in a bit of contrast here, and the way that I do this is not a straight S curve. I've got two layers with different curves, one up, one down, in terms of adding the shadows and the highlights, and then using a mask and a negative mask on the image to ensure. What that does is it ensures that there's no color, there's no loss in the integrity of the color. What I find is that often if you just do straight curves to get contrast, you can also increase the saturation, which is not what I want. I just want to make sure that the levels change. So in this particular case, we've added contrast. Again, I'm going to dial that back a little bit. I prefer it to be about there, and you can see when I turn that off, and again, this is personal preference, but that gives it enough pop for me without losing any of the details through the highlights or the shadows. Still see a lot in the hair where it's dark, and plenty of the skin tone and the graduation between the sort of highlight to shadow areas. So I'm happy with that. I then also flatten it down to 8 bits, because I know from here I'm not really going to do anything. Ideally I wouldn't do anything at all, but if there's minor adjustments, if the client decides to buy this and I need to send it off to the printer, then I'm happy to work on the 8-bit file, because I know I'm not going to do much to it at all, and it just saves me a bit of space and saves my computer a little bit. So hit save on that, and that'll write the TIFF back to the catalog, and that's pretty much the end of my cosmetic retouching workflow. So hope you find that useful. Again, my name's Brad Scott. I run the portrait studio Images by Brad out of Sydney, Australia. and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.